Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the virtual Bright Family Screening Room. The physical cinema resides on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Massachusetts people, whose name was appropriated by the Commonwealth. And I'm currently in Providence, Rhode Island, the occupied land of the Narragansett and Wampanoag people. My name is Anna Fetter. I'm the Director of Programming in the Visual Media Arts Department, and they're the host of this series that we call Limitless Possibilities, where we look at possibilities for creativity when making films with restrictions, very appropriate for where we are right now. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions. You can submit them through the Q&A or you can put them in the chat. And then what we'll do is we'll call on you and ask you if you want to ask your own question. You just raise your hand, which is under the participants under your name, and then we'll promote you to a panelist. You can turn on your video and audio and then ask your own question. Magic of Zoom. So I wanted to start by introducing our faculty moderator, Kathryn Ramey, who will introduce our guest for this evening. Kathryn Ramey is a filmmaker and anthropologist whose work operates at the intersection of experimental film processes and ethnographic research. Her award-winning and strongly personal films are characterized by manipulation of the celluloid, including hand processing, optical printing, and various direct animation techniques. Her scholarly interest is focused on the social history of the avant-garde film community, the anthropology of visual communication, and the intersection between avant-garde and ethnographic film and art practices. She's been the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including the Social Science Research Council on the Arts Fellowship, the Left New England Moving Image Grant, the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts Fellowship, Massachusetts Cultural Council Artist Fellowship, Creative Capital, and has been a fellow in residence at Yaddo Artist Colony and the Film Study Center at Harvard. She's a professor at Emerson College. Welcome, Kathryn.
Whoops, hi, hello. It's great to be here with Sky. Sky Hopinka is of the Ho-Chunk Nation and was born and raised in Ferndale, Washington, so a fellow Washingtonian. I'm also from Washington State. He spent a number of years in Palm Springs and Riverside, California, Portland, Oregon, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And in Portland, he studied and taught Chinookwara, a language indigenous to the lower Columbia River Basin. His video, photo, and text work centers around personal positions of indigenous homeland and landscape, designs of language as containers of culture expressed through personal, documentary, and nonfiction forms of media. He received his BA from Portland State University in liberal arts and his MFA in film, video, animation, and new genres from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. His work has screened and been awarded internationally, including at the Whitney Biennial and the Pompidou. And he has been a fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University, a Sundance Art of Nonfiction Fellow, and is currently a Guggenheim Fellow. And he teaches at Bard College in Film and Electronic Arts. Thank you so much for joining us, Sky.
Thank you.
It makes me feel like a radio announcer. So one of the sort of concepts around this series, as I understand it, is the idea of films that were made with certain kinds of limitations, limitations of access, limitations of ability to actually speak directly with people. And well, I know, and in this case, we're speaking specifically about your film Dislocation Blues. And obviously you were present at Standing Rock at some point. There's a Terry's Running Wild's audio seems to be from there. But I guess my first question would really be to ask you about how that piece took shape and the various kinds of decisions that you made as you were thinking about what we call characters, the people who are actually in it, giving voice, and how you chose to include them in the way that you included them.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like every time I talk about the film, I think about something else along the way, or just like in terms of just how it came to be or the things I was thinking about. So that makes it funner to tell the story. Especially because I was thinking earlier today actually about just like wandering around camp my first night there and not really sure what I wanted to shoot. And I don't know, just like trying different things, but then just, I don't know, just like wandering until like, it was like dark and light. And I don't really know, like met one person there at that time when I first went there. And so there was just, it was all new, and it was all fresh. And I didn't like run into people that I'd known yet. And I hadn't met Terry, and I hadn't met up with Cleo yet. So just that, I don't know, it was like something about that first night there that I was thinking about, just in terms of having a camera and not quite sure what I was going to do with it, or what I was going to point it at, or whether it was going to function as an entry point into being part of this community. And I remember talking to a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, just about like, what do I do? What do I shoot? I have no idea what to shoot. And she was just telling me just to like, don't shoot, you know, just walk around, like get to know people, just like relax, it's okay. Because I don't know, I was like really in my head a lot at that point too, especially with the 10-hour drive from Milwaukee to Bismarck and to Standing Rock. Just thinking like, what am I doing here? What is my reason for coming here? How am I going to be supportive of this? Am I going to be in the way? How can I contribute? And just like all these different questions were running through my head. And like ultimately, I mean, I just, you know, I went and ran like a second camera for a friend of mine who was filming more of the direct actions. And that became the bulk of the footage that I got the first trip out there. And there were a few instances here and there where I don't know, I was just, that ended up in Dislocation Blues from me just having a camera on hand and just filming something because of, I don't know, like, I liked how it looked, and I liked how it felt, or it related to this feeling I was trying to pursue. And like, yeah, with the shooting, that's really what informed a lot of the different moments. Wasn't necessarily trying to follow a prescripted plan, but just doing a lot of searching and the pursuit of a feeling that's I couldn't quite identify, but that ultimately I think really guided the film into its final form.
So as someone who enters a lot of unfamiliar or, you know, locations that are fraught with, you know, where there's a lot of different things going on, I'm very familiar with the not putting the camera up, putting the camera down and just hanging out. In fact, you know, that's part of the anthropological training, is to put the camera, just hang out. Well, one of the things, there's two things. There's something in the film that feels really like you, like the way that you capture landscape, even though this particular, often your landscapes don't have people or have very few people, and these landscapes do, but the way that you capture the landscapes feels of a piece with your work. There's this way of looking at the horizon. So that's really beautiful and resonant. But we can come back to that. The thing that I'm super curious about is how you eventually kind of chose the stories, the two characters, if we're going to call them that, Terry running wild, then Cleo, and how you chose to use Terry's, just Terry's audio. Maybe there was only audio, and then how you chose to interview Cleo after the fact.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of plans to do interviews, but I just never really got around to it at camp. And there was always just an intention of like, you know, just swimming an interview. That's like Cleo, we were supposed to interview when our paths crossed there, but whenever I was leaving, they were coming, and then when I came back, and they left, and so it didn't really work out. And so I don't know, it's just like, even like with that, I mean, if something doesn't feel right, I'm not going to do it. And I didn't really feel too inclined to do an interview or do a bunch of interviews. And the audio interview with Terry was the only interview that I did there, and that was just purely audio. I don't know, because I guess it just felt a bit more casual rather than, you know, trying to set up a shot or point a camera at him. And I just had a microphone with me. And so that's how that came about. And I never really felt like I failed in a certain sense, that I didn't do more interviews, or I didn't get more audio, or I didn't, do another interview with Terry when I saw him next. It was just sort of, I don't know, I just felt like, okay, this is like what I have, and I feel fine with that. And it felt appropriate somehow. But while putting the film together, I definitely felt like it needed another element to complete it, or to bridge all these, to bridge the images to the feelings I was feeling, or the things I was thinking. And uh, I just, immediately thought of Cleo. And after some time, before I even started assembling the film, which also took me a fair amount of time from, I guess, December. I mean, just partly out of like depression and disappointments. And this is also just like, a few weeks after Trump was inaugurated, that I started editing the film. So it was like really heavy. And the conversation with Cleo turned into a space that was reflective of that in a lot of ways. And I knew that I wanted to film the interview on a laptop, but I also didn't really, I don't know, I guess I wasn't really concerned with trying to make, I don't know, like whenever I see, I mean, I guess like pre-COVID around that time too, people filming like FaceTimes or Skypes, there's just, I don't know, there was something about that I wasn't that interested in, but I was also interested in the idea of it. And so I just like wanted not, and I wanted to like frame Cleo in such a way that I don't know, like it occupied the same space as like a talking head interview, and entered that realm of the talking head interview, rather than trying to like, film me talking to Cleo on the screen, that just seems kind of silly. And I'd also been talking to Brett's Story around that time when, I don't know, we were past cross at a festival, and yeah, she was like talking a lot about the talking head and how the talking head gets a bad rap, especially like an art film. And, it's, I don't know, I really agreed with her, because like I'm a fan of a good talking head interview. And it was encouraging to try and find a way to then incorporate that into the film. And also to look at how the screen is like a reflection of the mediation between what it meant to be present at Standing Rock, or what it meant to participate, whether that was like virtually on Instagram or Facebook, or checking in or whatever it was, or going in person. And I don't know, I think I was just really fascinated too with that idea of presence, but then also the idea of the versatility of Indigenous movement around, these lands, and how mobile people are. And I don't know, like nothing, I don't know, like the idea of a fixed location, even around homelands, is pretty fraught in a lot of ways. And so, I don't know, it's just like, it seemed like a really simple way to express that, and to set the film up, to bookend the film actually with just like these screens, and how they mediate this experience, and also like how, I don't know, it hopefully like implicates the viewer in some sort of way, and questioning like their own participation of witnessing a virtual participation in something. I haven't like done too much thinking about what that means in this era right now, and I don't think I'm ready to do that yet. But I don't know, like the just those small things, like with the audio too. Like, I mean, having Cleo record audio on their side, and then syncing that up with the audio from my camera, just like, again, to remove that sort of like filter of just like, oh, you're seeing a screen, so the audio needs to sound like it's coming from a laptop speaker. And I don't know, I just like wasn't really that interested in that either, and wanted to focus on the fidelity of Cleo's voice, and just like have small little gestures like that point to the construction, that point to, I don't know, like, I guess even like a dislocated space, for one where I am as the interviewer with Cleo, and then also where the viewer sits in a mediation of screens, and then also, I don't know what actually was going on there, and even just the temporal sort of differences between Terry talking about the camps in the present tense, and Cleo in the past tense. And I mean, yeah, everything like feels dislocated. And I don't know, just like the construction of it really came from a desire to, I don't know, find small little tweaks or small little angles that could, I don't know, underscore that feeling that, again, like I was trying to pursue.
I would have watched it at this point a number of times, because since you came to my class a few years ago, I we bought it. I screen it regularly, and as well as other pieces of yours. And I'm always really enjoy. There's a way, it's not luxurious, but the audio is really rich, right? It's really present. In Cleo's interview, and they do the thing that we all do on the screen. We get mismatched with our audio. The screen freezes, and so there's this way of privileging voice in the hierarchy of it that I really deeply appreciate. And it's really interesting because Cleo's voice is very clear and has great presence. And at times Terry's dips, because it's clearly a location audio situation, has less of that conventional fidelity of an interview, and yet has a different kind of presence. So there's all these different layers of presence of the different characters that I agree with you, sort of not fight with each other, but come into a productive conflict with each other around our ideas of making hierarchies of whatever, of truth, and of what's the present, what's the past. And even in the beginning, I think Terry sort of interrupts Cleo. Like Cleo's talking along, and then Terry's interview sort of comes in a way, almost in mid-sentence. And it's this great way of putting them in conversation when you know that they're not in a conventional sense. So all of those strategies are very, for me as a filmmaker, feel very instinctual, but I'd love to know if you can think about it, and now remembering that this was made after the 2016 election, you may not be able to remember this because my memories of that time are painful as well. How did you, as you were addressing this material, how did you start to make some of those kinds of decisions, I guess? And then we actually have a question from the Q&A. So I'll add, that'll be my last question, and then I'll ask a question from the audience.
Yeah, like those moments, like the one you mentioned with Terry and Cleo. So I actually never really thought of it as an interruption, but like that points to the strategy that I was using with the interview with Cleo, where I didn't want to include what they were talking about because but I wanted to include the parts where they're responding to the story they just told or they're about to tell. And I don't know, just like out of sense of protection in some sort of ways, or just like, because like then, I don't know, because like then, I don't know, like Cleo is such a beautiful speaker and so thoughtful. And I just felt like they really underscored a lot of the feelings and verbalized a lot of the feelings that I couldn't put words to or was struggling with, especially in that opening sequence with Cleo talking and responding to being there. Like they just told a long story about, how they got there at A to B with these travels and like the cars and all that. And it was just, I don't know, the description of the arrival was the thing that, I don't know, I felt like was something I could relate to and hopefully like an audience could relate to. And like in that first section, I cut off Cleo just as they were about to start telling another story. And I don't know, it just had a sense of protection, I guess, or like, privacy. Like, I don't know, the details are the details because it's a conversation we're having. And I don't know, the emotional sort of response is something that's, I don't know, I thought was like more relevance in its ambiguity because it's something that a lot of people that went there could identify with. And I don't know, it's like, yeah, like keeping, like cutting the interview mid-sentence, or just like as Cleo is saying ends, just to kind of underscore the fact that there's something else being said that you're not hearing. And I think it was just a little playful with, I think when Terry comes in, I actually don't recall what he was saying. But like with the interview with Terry, like, I mean, a lot of that was just, I don't know, it was tense. It's something like, I mean, I guess like not that many people pick up. I think it's because they're not familiar with his accent. But one of the things that he was saying was like, you know, he's following someone around that was in camp. And he's talking about these different securities and how like AIM security is going to come and talk to him. And, you know, just like everyone has their securities and their insecurities. And so it was a really like tense situation. And like we had, I don't know, hung out a few times before that. And so like when I saw him, like, I don't know, he was always like really playful and was like always teasing me about stuff. But when I saw him, he just seemed so quiet and so tense. And I don't know what about that moment maybe asked him to do an interview, I think, because I don't know, he said, yeah. And I don't know, but I think that that moment, or the things that he's talking about being at camp and like in some ways saying the party line, but then also just like really meaning it and really just like, you know, kind of in awe of what this experience had meant. And even just being there too, like, I mean, I don't know, I was there for like 3 weeks, 3 times a week at a time, a little over a week at a time, in November and December. But I mean, like, yeah, him and his family had been there all through the summer, and it's just such a life-changing event and such a departure from what's, I don't know, from everyday life in a lot of ways, that I think is really, I don't know. I'm not sure how much of that came across in the interview, but it's what I was thinking about while editing and weaving together these different conversations.
Well, I do think I'm going to get to the question from the audience, but I do think that, and again, I watched it probably too many times. I'm looking for things. I mean, one of the things that I noticed today that I never noticed, right, was like there's a shot of the night sky and you can see the dipper, one of the dippers, little dipper, I guess, and which is just so, I mean, there's such an we lose the stars on the East Coast. You can't see them because of the light. And I was like, oh my God, there's the, like, you know, like there's so many things that I've noticed. But one of the things that Terry picks up on when he begins to speak after Cleo is really reiterating the idea of being in the camp. So Cleo's been talking about it in its past tense, and he's talking about it in the present tense. And he talks about the securities and insecurities, but he also says all these things like everybody's thinking the same thing you're thinking. They all want it to happen the same way. You know, there's this whole idea of this sort of collective movement, and you know, later Cleo talks about how, you know, everything is built with them in mind, with white folks in mind, and so. You know, that place was built completely different from that, and perhaps could seem alienating, but also felt so at home. Like there's all these ways in which they're sort of finishing each other's sentences, you know, in the past and the present. That's really incredibly evocative of, in one way, giving a sense of the uniqueness of the space and time, but also, as you say, not giving anything away, not, you know, being very protecting, and which I understand. And even Cleo points to this and says, there's things I would never say to someone who wasn't there. And I can definitely understand and respect that. So the question, okay, so Anna, you're gonna have to help me with this. Can we bring Mae up so that Mae can ask her own question?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
So Mae should be able to turn on the video. Yes.
Hey, good to see you.
Hi.
It sounds a little far away.
All right, I'm gonna do some radio stuff. But, I'm Mae, this is my associate, Adam Cordell. And I wanted to ask, I do some documentaries, and what I really loved about this one was that there's this sense that something important is happening at this moment, and you don't ruin the fun by spelling out like on this day, July 7th, 2015 or whatever. But yeah, like Kathryn was saying, there's the framing of like Cleo remembering this place, I get this feeling that I'm like getting a glimpse into it, but there's still a lot, it makes me want to learn more. And so my question is, why this moment? How did you decide when exactly to go?
I think it was like I had the weekend off, and I yeah, it was like middle of the semester, and it was like I think my first semester as a TA after graduating from grad school, and so at the university where I went to grad school, I just like stayed on, got some experience there as a TA, and I don't know, I've been planning on it and planning on it, and a person that I met from who went to Milwaukee who went to Milwaukee's film program, but was working in New York as a journalist or a video production person on a news show, was going, and we got put in contact, and I don't know, he turned out really great, had some good vibes, and he was there, and so he invited me to come and was really encouraging me to come, and we were, I don't know, talking about like, shooting, but then also just like, I don't know, it just, things just seemed to line up in a way that November worked out. And so I just went, and I ended up staying like a week or nine or 10 days there. Actually, yeah, I remember actually the night that I left to leave Stand Rock to head back to Milwaukee was election night. And I remember I got pulled over to sleep in the back of my truck, and I woke up at 2 a.m. and I looked at my phone and I saw the results. And I don't know, there's something about that that just made me want to, I don't know. Everything felt more important, not more important, just like more urgent, but not urgent, but urgent, really urgent. But then like, I don't know, this like kind of looming sense of doom also kind of foreshadowed, or it was overshadowing a lot of these feelings. And so like I decided to go back, the next few times that I could. So I went back 3 times in November and December. And that was just, I don't know, just like timing and like, having a lot of really great support from Milwaukee and people giving me gas money and time off from teaching. And that was really, really wonderful. And I'm really thankful for that support. And I don't know, just trying to find ways to, I don't know, even like with the structure of the film itself, where my friend who was there shooting is still working on his documentary, and they have like, I don't know, like 300 or 400 hours of footage. They were there for a very long time. I think they have more now, and all through the winter. And that, I don't know, I feel like they have that covered. And that was freeing in a certain way where I felt like I wanted to just not produce a snapshot or a vignette, but just, I don't know, a glimpse into what one small aspect or one corner of that experience was during this time. And the time is important because you can see, like, I don't know, the landscape, you can see the changing of the seasons and then the introduction of snow. And I don't know, just like that small corner, that small glimpse from the 3 of our perspectives, mine, Cleo, and Terry's, I don't know, it felt like a way to limit the scope of the film in such a way that it's not trying to encompass everything that happened and tell a story about, I don't know, how it started, what was going on, what happened on this day and this day and this day, and how it ended. And I don't know, because like it felt like, one, like there's a lot of coverage and there's a lot of like media and there's a lot of films being made, and they can do that. And how can this film also exist in part of that conversation too, in conjunction with these other films and these other poems and these other books and these other writings that people are producing and other stories that they're telling. And I don't know, I think that felt very freeing to then focus on my own small corner of my experience there, or of an experience there.
So
Thanks for saying. He's got a question too, if there's time for it.
Yes, of course. Adam, go.
Hi, just a question about the song that you use at the end, the Bobby Darin cover of "But Not for Me." I've heard the song before, and the cover is very different from any normal kind of playing of it. So I'm very curious what your thought process behind, one, using the song "But Not for Me" in the ending credits with I presume Cleo singing along with it, and 2, why that specific Bobby Darin cover over, say, like over say a normal rendition of the song?
That actually is Bobby Darin. And I've also, it felt really important to have Nicole. It's my friend Nicole Wallace. She's an Anishinaabe poet who like sings and is a good friend, singing over it and singing along to it. And I think from the beginning or the early clip, but I just remember also when I was editing or starting to edit this, it was like in February, and I was also teaching as an adjunct at UIC in Chicago while I was teaching at Milwaukee. So I don't know, 2 days a week, I would drive from 6 a.m. until like 9:30 a.m. to make my class, and just it's a terrible commute. And one morning, that song came on the radio, and I just like totally dug it. And for like 3 hours in my car, I just like played it on repeat. I found it, and it just seemed to really resonate. And I guess like in an obsessive way that I have of just like capturing a mood and a tone and just a sense of defiance. And I think the defiance in the song and the sort of like resignation, but I don't know, there's a certain agency in that resignation, and I don't know, there's pride in that defiance that really seemed to encapsulate the experience of Standing Rock for me in a lot of ways. And I don't know, just like it just kind of fit into place at the end of the movie, and even just like helped me arrive to the final shot, which is that reverse tracking shot at the back of the car, and then like the pull into the screen. And I don't know, like all those things kind of ended up speaking together in ways that it's hard for me to parse out right now. But I don't know, like there's a certain defiance to the song. And with Nicole, actually, I was never sure how to end the film. It took me a long time to end the film. It's like the last thing that I did was just that stuff. And I showed an early cut to a group of friends, and one of them suggested that, just like have someone sing along in a car. And I don't know, that just idea really, I thought it was really great. And I asked Nicole to sing along to the song and record herself doing that. And yeah, just it seemed to work together in a way that's, again, places with these different ideas of dislocation, or where one locates themselves, like what car are you in, and where are you in terms of like the radio or singing along to something. And yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of reasons around this song, and also like kind of skirting around copyright stuff.
Well, thank you. And I thought it was a very emotionally resonant moment.
I also, it's funny. I didn't think of it ever as being in the car, but now that you say that, I'm like, oh yeah, of course. I suppose if I would have had some ambient sound of car noise, but the idea of singing along, I mean, it was more like what we all do, when we're washing the dishes, or folding the laundry, or whatever other people do, of singing along to a song that that sort of transports us from whatever the mundane activity that we are doing into the sort of mental space that we're occupying as we're trying to get through. So that definitely happened for me. Like, I do have a question about how you decided on that last studio setup. I mean, it's like the projection and the chairs and the sheets over the chairs. And I mean, I feel like I've seen you do build things like that before in projections and stuff. So it's not like it's outside of your wheelhouse, but just why'd you decide for this particular piece to do that thing?
I think that's like my first time in that wheelhouse, actually. Because I'd been interested in green screen and green screen cloth, and like for a while, because like I would screen this as a work in progress for like different solo shows that I had in terms of the programs that I would bring. And so I don't know, it's just like I play this in front of people, and it's just like the ending was always a placeholder, which was just the straight shot of that reverse tracking on the back of the truck and like driving to camp. And I don't know, I like the shot, but then I also felt like it was just too easy, or it was just like saying goodbye, see you later, Indians, everything's gonna be okay, go back to my world. And that just felt gross. And so like, for then a little while ago, I just like inverted the image just as a way to mark that, I don't know, something's not right here. And I don't know, then I started thinking about like what to do with just like an audience, or having the audience I'm afraid of that no longer, that feels like they get a pass because they bore witness to this, that's, you know, how to then hold them accountable in some sort of way, or just like not hold them accountable, just like position the audience to then question, I don't know, their location in front of these different screens as well as a viewer, and the act of viewing, what that means or what that does. And I don't know, yeah, that was at the UWM lighting studio. And I don't know, yeah, I just like hung out there one night and had borrowed some green screen cloth from my good friend Ben Balcom, because he just used it for a movie that he made. And I had an idea of like having an audience there, like it was some sort of green screen material. And so I just wanted to do some tests with this dolly that I couldn't even plug into my camera, or like, I mean, it wouldn't even bolt into my camera. So I was just like kind of like balancing it and like moving it around and just doing a couple passes. And I don't know, there was something about, and then having the video play off my computer into the projector. And I don't know, just something about it worked out. And I don't know, like, I think in one of the passes that the pass leading up, I did like this digital zoom onto the green screen cloth and then did like an artificial pull out. And so that allowed, I don't know, that transition, or that's where I got the idea for the transition from, I don't know, the screen to the green screen cloth or whatever it is. And yeah, it just seemed like, you know, a nice way to end it, and to still like offer a sense of emptiness. That's
Right.
I don't know.
Well, it's this way of, for me, because you have it draped over these chairs, right? So it's clearly we're in some sort of classroom or screening space or whatever, and there's no one present, but there's chairs waiting for them, and you've draped the screen over, but you can still see the chairs. And it's like this, like sort of this provocation, invitation, like this is where you ought to be, you know, like, or something. Pay attention. Like,
Yeah, I think it's open to interpretation. I mean, because like, I mean, even like when I did it, this was just like a test that I was going to do, and I was going to have people sitting in those chairs, but I just wanted to see the space. And I don't know if it was just like time or timing, or just, you know, liking how the test turned out, or laziness. I don't know. But there was something about the empty space that's, I don't know, that felt very evocative and offered a question to how, I don't know, also the film opens and bookends with Cleo on the screen, just looking off into the distance board, waiting for me to start.
right. Well, it's also very lonely. I mean, that shot at the end. And also kind of even in the beginning, it's a little bit lonely. Like, so there's this way in which this is a film with a lot of people in it. It's about a people's movement. It's about, but there's this, and you know, that's part of it, the dislocation, the disorientation. And yeah, I know, I think I mean, it always worked for me. I never thought it was lazy. I thought you meant to do that. And I thought that it was really like this is going to sound weird probably, but the way that people are in your film, they're never in your filming in sort of conventional ways, right? There's one shot where there's a guy filming something or shooting something on his iPhone, where he's in the foreground and then he's but then he's even that person who's actually in your frame is kind of moved past, and you're actually trying to shoot the landscape. So there's a way in which people are always at some kind of remove. They're never, and I think that it's productive, because it causes you to question your relationship with what you're watching, and with how much you think about what you're hearing, and not sort of fall into the fetishization of the real, that sort of thing. I'm wondering if there are any other, I can't see our audience, so I have no idea what's going on. But I'm wondering if anyone would like to bust in on this conversation or.
Yeah, feel free to just raise your hand if you have a question, or put the question in the chat, or put the question in the Q&A function.
I don't even know how to see raised hands.
Under participants.
Okie dokie. I just see Sky and myself. So if Anna, if you see somebody, let me know. So the one thing Adam actually touched on is something that I actually think about a lot in much of your work is the presence of music in your work. It's always interesting to me. I'm always excited about what you choose and like want to like think about it. And I love the story that you told about finding that song and just sort of, you know, deciding that this was the song that evoked this particular experience. But is there other music throughout the piece? I mean, I think there is some additional music treatment in the piece. And how do you make those choices? How do you, you know, where did you find that material, or did you ask someone to create it for you?
I'm trying to think what other music is in there.
I think there's drumming.
There's drumming.
But it doesn't sound like ambient, like drumming that you recorded on site. Is it?
I don't know. I think like all the sound except for the Bobby Darin song and Cleo's interview was from either the camera or the microphone that I had with the set box. So yeah, I mean, like a big part of like the nightly routine too at Steady Rock, which is just really beautiful. And I'm just like thinking about it now, actually, it's just people would perform every night, you know, and like around the fire with like, you know, like a microphone and PA system, they'd sing and they'd, you know, bring their songs and bring their stories and bring their messages. And like, that was really beautiful. And I don't know. Yeah, it's just like, I don't know. Especially now, just remembering that very much the non-Netflix version of Netflix, you know, just sit around a fire, listen to people talk and sing and perform and dance. Yeah, so all the sound came from Standing Rock, except for those few things I mentioned. And yeah, just like trying to find ways to weave them in together and to, I don't know, underscore or to heighten or sweeten a certain mood or a moment.
There we go. I have a question. Homa, are you willing to ask this question on screen?
Yeah, Homa, just raise your hand and I'll.
Okay.
There, okay. So now you should be able to turn on your video and audio.
Hi, Homa.
Hello.
Hi.
There's so many buttons to press before you get to speak, but it's okay. So hi, Homa. I'm like just going with the theme of the night and the series, which is about the restrictions. I was thinking if you were like, we were thinking about making movies under restrictions, and that was a thing we were thinking when we were watching your movie too. And if you were to say, what were the major restrictions or, I don't know, difficulties you were facing, like making the movie, from like when you had the idea or when you had to go there and when you had to interact with people, whatever it could be, what are those restrictions? Because I think that's what we are focusing on right now and thinking like, oh, we have to make movies like not leaving our houses, right? Or we have to make movies not leaving the town or something. What was your approach? And you knew a lot of, like, you probably couldn't do a lot of things before even you entered that space. But what was your approach for overcoming those restrictions?
I don't know, there's a certain, I don't know, I guess like stubbornness. Like, I don't know, like there's always this feeling that I truly have tried to foster, especially in making more experimental work without any really funding or support, or having my own gear is just having my own gear so I don't need money to buy gear, you know, or rent gear, and like just having a simple camera setup and all that. And I don't know, there's a certain persistence that's, I don't know. Well, it's like, even like with the footage that I had and coming back with it and not knowing what I was going to do with it, it's just I always knew I was going to do something with it. And that's, I don't know, just finding finding ways to like work footage, work with what you have, or just like work the material as best you can, and constructing it in, I don't know, ways that make sense for whatever form it is or wants to take or wants to shape or to be shaped to. I don't know. It's like, I mean, it's hard for me to say it too, because like I don't know how productive I've been during the pandemic, or even how much I want to make films right now, which is normal, I guess. But at the same time, like, I mean, I just finished a 3-channel installation, and a lot of that was just trying to, you know, shoot around the limitations that I had and not necessarily make it reflective of the feelings I'm feeling right now, but rather, I don't know, what the bigger ideas of the film is. There's just, I think that this is like something I've also been like thinking about too, especially with making work in a pandemic, or making a work that is during a time where everyone is feeling the same thing or some version of the same thing to these different degrees. And what do I want to hear, and what do I want to feel, and what do I want to think about, and what do I want to see, or what do I want to shoot? I don't know. Those are questions that I have that, I mean, I think I'm like talking around your question in all the ways that I can think of, because I don't really know. It's just like with the restrictions with Standing Rock, you know, it's just, I don't know if I've ever really thought about it like that. I don't know. I guess like there's something about wanting to make something, or just feeling like you have to make something, and having the realization of that project be the goal rather than the details about what the project is. That's how I felt with this film. Like I didn't know what it was going to be. I didn't know what it was going to shape, it was going to take, or what the shots were going to be, or what shots I wanted to get or didn't want to get. I mean, I knew I didn't want to film violence, and I knew I didn't want to film the protest because there's a lot of cameras there already. And I don't know. I didn't really want to participate in that sort of violence of filming Native people getting hurt. And so like those were like the limitations and restrictions I placed around myself. But I don't know, I think even in making these films as an Indigenous person, as someone who traditionally hasn't had a lot of power when it comes to how we're represented on screen, I think there's a certain stubbornness and ignorance. I mean, like a productive ignorance around just like, hey, I'm gonna make a film. I don't know what it's gonna be, but it's gonna be a film. And how am I gonna make it happen? I have 3 hours of footage that I really wanna use. It's not a lot, but you know, how can I get creative with it and really embrace the artifacts? Or how can I position the editing process and the assemblage process in such a way that's, I don't know, leads me wherever it wants to lead me, I guess.
So would you say a lot of like that thinking happened afterwards? Like you came back from shooting and experiencing what you experienced as Standing Rock, and you came back and like a lot of the decisions you were making for the film happened afterwards eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like sometimes like there was like a pan and well, like, I mean, there's certain shots that happened, like that I knew that I wanted to fit in somewhere. Like when everyone is like walking across the screen at the very end, like that was something I knew that I wanted at the end. And there was that shot of the person sitting on the hill in the morning. I knew I wanted that to open the film. And it's just kind of like building it around there, but then also just like, I don't know, get this feeling of where does this shot go? Does this feel like something that happens in the beginning, the middle, or an end? And I think that's really actually where a lot of the editing process begins for me, or the assemblage. Because because I think like the editing process is also the part of like the story creation. And it's just like a lot of back and forth too. Like, I mean, I made an assemblage, like a 30-minute assemblage of the footage, but I had no idea what this film was going to be about or what it needed. And that's when I called up Cleo and said, hey, can we do that interview? And it just worked out that way. And so it's just like a constantly evolving process. It's like even like, yeah, like when I premiered it, it was still a work in progress. I didn't finish it and have a final cut until like 5 months later, but I was still like screening it in places. So I don't know, I think I'm like very process oriented, especially in thinking about making something now too. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know, all of the, all of these steps along the way feel like mini crises that I just simply can't live without. Like, oh my God, what am I gonna shoot? And it's like, oh my God, how am I gonna edit this? Oh my God, how am I gonna finish this? You know?
That sounds like every film ever that I've ever made. Oh my God, what am I going to shoot? Oh my God, now that I have all this, how am I going to edit it? That's how I always say that experimental filmmakers were like gatherers. We gather, and then we're like, ah. And sometimes it could be one film, we can make many films. But there's a couple other questions. And we're nearing our time. So I'd like to, if it's okay, call on João, if you're out there, João, somewhere.
I just promoted them to panelist.
Hey, hello,
Hey,
are you in San Francisco?
how are you?
Hello.
Good to see you.
It's great to see you too.
It's been so long.
It's been
And funny thing is that the last time that we saw each other, we saw a Sky Hopkina film together.
There you go.
Good mess. Such a good memories. Sky, I'm a big fan of yours, and I would love to just hear your thoughts a little bit. I know that much of your work deals a lot with languages and pushing languages, not only written languages, but also spoken languages and the cinematic languages. You use different genres and different styles of filmmaking. And I particularly like Fainting Spells and Cloudless Blue Grass, which have been something that I've been on and off all the time in my free time. But so with that in mind, I just want to ask you, how do you see contemporary filmmaking advancing in those languages? I saw in an interview that you talk a lot about that you're in search for what it means to be an indigenous language in filmmaking, in the American filmmaking, but maybe an indigenous language, a indigenous cinematic language in other countries with other native people. It would completely different. Would you agree? And how can your work and your perception of contemporary cinema has been on that particular genre of language, native language and native culture, and what's your experience on that regards?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, I think it was like a film that I'd seen. It was definitely like Uncle Boone, You're Gonna Call Us Past Lives by Pechanga Band. That I saw that film in 2013, and I think it was one of the first films that really made me, or it showed me like what it looks like for a film to speak to a very specific community and challenge the audience, if they're not from that community, to then meet the film and meet the work. And just like realizing that's like what a lot of Western films do too. And how just like then the sort of the standard or the basis or neutral is always like white Western. And so just that gave me some courage and some ideas around what that means to then make work specifically for an Indigenous audience. And that doesn't mean that like no one can see it or no one, like an audience is denied the ability to view it, but they're denied the certain privileges that they've experienced through most of, I don't know, like the history of cinema or documentary or ethnography or whatever, that the prioritization of the audience is always the person that doesn't know what this is, and then to further exemplify the exotic aspects of it. And I mean, I've always like viewed these films as like propositions or just like questions asking what could this cinema look like that is Indigenous, and how does language factor into that, and how does vernacular factor into that? I mean, even just something simple like someone once asked me if I could subtitle Terry Running Wild's dialogue, and I said no, you speak in English. keep up. And it's like small things like that. So that's, I mean, I think are different from like, accessibility in terms of like captioning versus, oh, I can't understand what you're saying because your accent is so different. That's, again, prioritizes a certain like standard, like American idea around identity. And for me, it's always in the answer has always been in the specifics. Like, not the answer, but just like the path that I've been interested in going down is the specifics, and how specific can I get to something that is, whether it's a Ho-Chunk audience or like any of these different audiences that can identify with the pieces more readily, and how to prioritize them in terms of what the content is and like what the context is of the work, and then just challenge or invite the audience that isn't a part of these communities to then meet the content and to meet the conceptual choices and the formal choices, and to engage with those in those ways. And I don't know how they further identify certain different aspects of it, which is like with like Dislocation Blues, like I was mentioning, I wasn't focused on like the details of the story that Cleo was telling, but rather their response and the reflections on it, because that's something that feels a bit more, I don't know, conversational rather than prescriptive about what happens. It's just like some like what happened. It's just about like, when did it happen and how did you feel about how it happened. And I don't know, I think there's a lot of thoughts about like, Indigenous cinema, like from around the world or from these different communities, that I think is really exciting, because it's always changing and it's always very specific. And even it like with the United States, there's like 570 federally recognized tribes, and that's like a lot of different communities. And how can like making work that focuses on something specifically Ho-Chunk or something specific to the Chinookan people, then, I don't know, highlights the nuances or highlight the differences between all these different communities, all these like 500 different communities, and just to account for the enormity of these different communities, rather than just like, a marginalized group. Like, I don't know, even like with the election, I don't know if people have seen this, but CNN, like they broke down the demographics of who voted for who, and it was like, Black, Hispanic, Asian, and then something else. And so like, we were something else. And so it's just like, we can't even like get recognition in that way, And so it's just like, I don't know, we're not just like 2% or 0.1% of, the larger population that then is labeled as something else, just something else is like 570 different communities around this country alone, not to mention like the world or the world that has been affected by colonization, which for me often like defines the broad term of Indigenous as those who are suffering the effects of colonization. And I don't know, just like think that there's a lot of conversations to be had with these different communities through cinema and through this art form that I think are really beautiful. And it's just like, how can like, these forms of cinema use the formal choices and effects and tools of traditional Western cinema to then create something new, or just to treat them as tools rather than prescriptive ideas around how things should be. Like there's no wrong way to use a camera. I mean, there's plenty of wrong ways to use a camera, but there's more possibilities than what we know.
But do you see a difference happening nowadays? Do you see that this progressive lens it's going the way you think it should?
Yeah, I mean, whether like I should or, I mean, that's not about what I think direction it should go, but it's going. And I think that that's great, because like more people are making work. And even just like with the sort of, the introduction of the DSLR and how that shifted the ability of people to then pick up cameras, including myself, and afford, cameras that's had a cinematic sort of quality. I mean, I see that happening more and more too, especially with Indigenous communities that are making work, or I don't know, whenever I see a filmmaker that makes work in spite of not having funding and not having support and not having the backing of, X, Y, and Z or whatever organization, and they're doing it and they're making amazing work, I think that's amazing. And I think that's wonderful. And I see a lot of that happening. And it's just like, now it's like kind of building these bridges between these different kind of like pockets that this is happening. I think it's really important.
I think we have one more audience question, if time allows, from Karen. So I don't know if Karen's still out there and is ready to ask her question. Oh, there she is.
Hi. Hi. So my question is really about a narrative of your documentary, because I feel like making a documentary is in some way you're trying to construct a narrative. And I wonder, because like I mentioned in the chat, like I feel like there's no a specific beginning and the end of your narrative. So I wonder if that is a rejection to the linear narrative that's more Eurocentric. And because I've seen some Black cinema and they're adopting this African narrative, which is derived from this oral tradition. So I wonder, because your content is also about like sort of identity, and you can probably adopt that identity back by applying this narrative of probably in Native American culture or like that kind of thing.
Yeah, like with the structure of the film itself, I mean, it definitely is a rejection of trying to create a story out of a lot of these different like interviews or these different topics. And even just like the way that I like to put films together or construct them. Like, I mean, I mentioned like, you know, sometimes I'll put a shot at the beginning because it feels like the beginning, and I'll put a shot at the end because it feels like an end. And that doesn't necessarily like, underscore like the narrative aspect of it, but rather just like how one enters a space and how one is prepared to meet the content of an interview or like the subject of an interview. And even just, I don't know, like a lot of what guides it is, not necessarily the ability for, is that true? Do I do that? Not necessarily for the ability, a bit for the ability for an audience to then enter the work at any point, and I don't know, or to reflect back on certain things and look at the connections that don't necessarily have to accumulate to an end, but rather the beginning also like functions as an introduction into the way to watch the film. I mean, I think I tend to like talk about that a lot, or just like think about that a lot, is I don't know, like I want an audience to learn how to watch the film within the first few minutes, to just like, you know what I'm working with, know how I'm going to introduce these different elements, and know, I don't know, this is like what they're doing, and how to like then use that as a rubric or as a key or a guide to then watch the rest of the film. And that also like comes from a long-standing question I have had, which is like, what is like non-linear storytelling? Because that's something that I don't know, I've heard a long time, like most of my life, just in terms of how to define more indigenous-based storytelling as being non-linear or being more circular. And I've always questioned, like, well, what does that mean, or what does that look like, especially in cinema? And so I do try to incorporate that, or am guided by that impulse, or am guided by that question in the construction of the work and the choices in the editing. And just, you know, having these kind of clips that are these sections of comments or like the interviews, words, people that are saying, like kind of like floats. Like they're very much locked in place, but they can also like float in terms of how you hear them or what you're paying attention to on screen. Or even just like thinking about like what might stand out to an audience that's listening to this, but also watching this, or just like experience what happens. And, you know, the 30 seconds before in the film, whether it's a lot of information that they're hearing and seeing, or I don't know, and how does like space like bring this up? Like I noticed like in the chat, you mentioned like the ahs and the ums and the pauses, and like, I mean, that's also like very constructed too. Like, I mean, I tend to edit out most of the ahs and ums, and also try to, I don't know, add a few beats in the conversation for effects, or to also just like replicate like natural conversation or flow, to make it feel natural. And I mean, I don't feel bad about doing that because it's what editors do. And but like, I mean, all that is, I think is like under the umbrella of beginning with the question of, yes, like how to then reclaim this form of storytelling, or how to assert a different form of storytelling outside of a Western one. And these are like the very practical formal tools that I've come across that will help me do it, or ways that I've tried to realize this question of how do we do this with cinema?
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and everyone who was asking questions. I think we're at time. I don't know. I have all these screens around me and none of them is flashing time, which is hilarious because, yeah, like one would think I would know what time it is. Oh, there's my phone. We're over time. So I don't know. Oh, there she is.
I'm back. Not that I need to be here.
It was great to see you, Sky. I'm excited that you're on the East Coast. Perhaps we can actually, when people can be in places again and show actual movies in real cinema, it would be amazing to have you out. I know you have Mothni, right? Is that how you say it, Mothni? Your feature film, which just seeing clips of made me like seeing the redwood forests and the and the Pacific Ocean was overwhelming, and I can't wait to see it in real life. Thank you so much for being here with us, and I'm gonna let Anna sing us out.
Yes, I didn't have anything formal to say, but just thank you all for being here. This recording will live on the Emerson VMA YouTube channel, which is launching in the next week. So you can check it out there and share it with other folks. And thank you so much to Sky. Thank you to Kathryn, and everyone have a lovely evening.
Bye. Thank you.
Oh, I will say one other thing. Tomorrow night, there's a documentary called The Condor and the Eagle about Indigenous climate activists. And we have one of the climate activists, Brian Paris, joining us, as well as one of our faculty, Laurel Greenberg. So check that out, 7 p.m. tomorrow evening, free, open to the public. Okay. Excellent. Good night.
Thank you, Anna. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Wear a mask.